So, this is one of my favorite books I'm going to go over today. It's called Flow by Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, and I'm going to do a whole podcast about this book. And I'm going to get pretty extensive on the information in this book as I find it to be very helpful. And we're going to dig in. So, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. I'm going to go over a lot of the concepts in this book, break them down nice and concise for people to get value out of this as quick as possible. Instead of reading the full book, you can come here and get the valuable insights from this literature. I'm going to read some of the passages that I highlighted, and then I'm going to expand on them a little bit. The paradox of rising expectations suggests that improving the quality of life might be an insurmountable task. In fact, there is no inherent problem with our desire to escalate our goals, as long as we enjoy the struggle along the way. The problem arises when people are so fixated on what they want to achieve that they cease to derive pleasure from the present. When that happens, they forfeit their chances of contentment. And this reminds me so vividly how important it is to enjoy the process. You know, the destination is not really as good as the journey that it takes to get to the destination. And you never really realize that until you do get to that destination. I mean, it's always good to get to the destination, fulfill the goals that you want to achieve. But the gratifying part is when you look back on it and you say, wow, those days were actually better than I thought they were as I was going through them. You know, when you're going through the hard work, the drudgery, it never seems fun. But when you look back on it, you're like, there's this certain appreciation for it. There's this perspective that you have. You got to keep in mind as well, that contributed to the person that you are becoming. So the person that you become was because of the things that you put yourself through. And that is one of the most valuable gifts that you cannot underestimate. We often get lost in the goal, the big goal that we want, the destination where we want to get to. It's easy to get wrapped up in that and forget about the enjoyment of the struggle. Because if you can't enjoy the struggle, you're never going to get to the destination. You're going to make it more difficult on yourself. So I think this highlight here explains how important it is to find enjoyment in the struggle. The next highlight, the lack of inner order manifests itself in the subjective condition that some call ontological anxiety or existential dread. Basically, it is a fear of being, a feeling that there is no meaning to life and that existence is not worth going on with. Nothing seems to make sense. In the last few generations, the specter of nuclear war has added an unprecedented threat to our hopes. There no longer seems to be any point to the historical strivings of humankind. We are just forgotten specks, drifting in the void. With each passing year, the chaos of the physical universe becomes magnified in the minds of the multitude. Now, this brings me back to my, mid-20s, around that time when I was feeling in such a way. I was feeling like this. I turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of having no purpose or feeling like there was no purpose to life. It just seemed dark. There was a lot of things going on in the world at that time. Not just in the world, but also in my immediate life. There was a lot of struggles happening, a lot of disappointments, and I did feel that way. The main question was, what is the purpose? What is the meaning of all this? Why is there so much suffering? And we have to break that mindset. And it was a struggle for me. I can speak for myself. I know a lot of my friends probably had the same problem. And that's why we were turning to things like drugs and alcohol. But for me especially, it was difficult to face the reality of how the world was working at the time. And I didn't know how to navigate through that. And I couldn't create. My creativity was hindered. I'm naturally a creative person, but my creativity was hindered in a big way because of that. Next highlight. The evidence that none of these solutions is any longer very effective is irrefutable. In the heyday of its material splendor, our society is suffering from an astonishing variety of strange ills. The profits made from the widespread dependence on illicit drugs are enriching murderers and terrorists. It seems possible that in the near future we shall be ruled by an oligarchy of former drug dealers who are rapidly gaining wealth and power at the expense of law-abiding citizens. And in our sexual lives, by shedding the shackles of hypocritical morality, we have unleashed destructive viruses upon one another. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure the reasoning behind me highlighting that quote. It could have been a lot of things, but what I want to mention is that it is still good to be aware of some of the ills or unfortunate things that happen in the world, because that can also be used as a motivator. For instance, the economy may be going down. That may motivate an individual to want to do good and be prepared for certain situations that come. So keeping that in mind is an important thing. At the same time, not getting wrapped up into it so much so that it hinders you from doing any activities. The next highlight: to overcome the anxieties and depressions of contemporary life, individuals must become independent of the social environment to the degree that they no longer respond exclusively in terms of its rewards and punishments. To achieve such autonomy, a person has to learn to provide rewards to herself. She has to develop the ability to find enjoyment and purpose, regardless of external circumstances. This challenge is both easier and more difficult than it sounds. Easier because the ability to do so is entirely within each person's hands. Difficult because it requires a discipline and perseverance that are relatively rare in any area, and perhaps especially in the present. And before all else, achieving control over experience requires a drastic change in attitude about what is important and what is not. That quote reminds me of how, say you're working a job, right? You're not only working this job, say you take a sales job somewhere. It's your first sales job. You want to make a certain amount of money. But the other more important thing that you're doing is you're acquiring necessary skills that you would need if you're starting a business, or you can look at the sales skills as interpersonal skills, communication skills, better persuasion skills in life that you can use in ordinary interactions with people. So it's not only you getting to this monetary goal, it's also a goal that's going to help you personally as well. Okay, let's go to the next highlight. It is important to realize that seeking pleasure is a reflex response built into our genes for the preservation of the species, not for the purpose of our own personal advantage. The pleasure we take in eating is an efficient way to ensure that the body will get the nourishment it needs. The pleasure of sexual intercourse is an equally practical method for the genes to program the body to reproduce and thereby to ensure the continuity of the genes. When a man is physically attracted to a woman or vice versa, he usually imagines, assuming that he thinks about it at all, that this desire is an expression of his own individual interest, as a result of his own intentions. But in reality, more often than not, his interest is simply being manipulated by the invisible genetic code, following its own plans. As long as the attraction is a reflex based on purely physical reactions, the person's own conscious plans probably play only a minimal role. There's nothing wrong with following this genetic programming and relishing in the result of pleasures it provides, as long as we recognize them for what they are and as long as we retain some control over them when it is necessary to pursue other goals to which we might decide to assign priority. I really like this quote because it reminds you how your body's cravings and reactions to certain stimuli is going to be powerful. That's all connected to the reptilian brain, the survival. Your sexual attraction to the opposite sex is ingrained in your genetic code so that you can continue the human species. That's why the primal urge is so strong. So the urge to reprocreate may not be in your best interest right now. Ultimately, that is the goal for a human being. But what is your objective first? It's a strong emotional reaction that you're having, and you may throw your original plan away, whatever it may be. And this happens frequently. And in the case of food, you might want to eat healthy, you might want to feel healthy, and you might want to have more energy, but that 7-layer cake is just calling you. We're wired for sugar because all throughout history, sugar wasn't as abundant as it is now. Every once in a while, you might get some honey and you would gorge on that honey, but you wouldn't have sugar like that every day. So it was like a quick burst of energy. So marketers and advertisements have hijacked our reward centers to advertise to us as well. So we're bombarded with so many ads every day, so many commercials, and they're being targeted to our desires. So we have to know the difference, and we have to know what's going on in that regard so that we can protect ourselves from things like this. Because it all comes back to your goals and what you truly want. And that's what this book, Flow, is about. It's about getting into a flow state to find what you truly want and harnessing that power, because it's very, very powerful. And then it goes on to say, the person who cannot resist food or alcohol, or whose mind is consistently focused on sex, is not free to direct his or her psychic energy. And the psychic energy is what we need to manifest the things that we want in this world. And if we're being controlled by outside stimuli, we really cannot tap into that psychic energy. So it's important to gain control of where your awareness is going. Next highlight. The largest part of free time, almost half of it for American adults, is spent in front of the television set. The plots and characters of the popular shows are so repetitive that although watching TV requires the processing of visual images, very little else is in the way of memory, thinking, or volition is required. Now, I like to say, basically what it's describing is how we only have so much attention in a day that we can use up. For instance, walking and chewing gum isn't that hard. It still takes a little bit of concentration, believe it or not. Driving, they say 15% of your daily attention is spent on regular maintenance, like brushing your teeth, using the bathroom, taking a shower, shaving, preparing your food, getting dressed, cleaning. So if that takes up 15%, and then things like driving and going to work is going to take up much more. So basically what it's saying is you only have a limited amount of attention that you can pay in a single day. So it's very important to use that attention wisely, because we're human beings and the capacity of our mind is not infinite to the point where we can pay attention to millions of things at one time. So that's why that's really important. Next quote, in any case, an individual can experience only so much. Therefore, the information we allow into our consciousness becomes extremely important. It is, in fact, what determines the content and the quality of life. So essentially, what the author is trying to get across to us here is that attention is a finite resource. It's not unlimited. You only have a certain amount of attention that you can pay. So what are you paying attention to in your daily life right now? There's all kinds of things that will grab your attention from you and make you pay. So I guess it's along the lines of where you're going to choose to put your attention, because according to where you choose to put your attention, that's going to determine how much flow you produce in your life. And it goes back to the skill finder quiz, finding out what your natural skills are, your natural talents are, so that you can have that flow state. So let's get into this next highlight here. The mark of a person who is in control of consciousness is the ability to focus attention at will, to be oblivious to distractions, to concentrate for as long as it takes to achieve a goal, and not longer. And the person who can do this usually enjoys the normal course of everyday life. It's enjoyment. You're enjoying what you do when you're focused on the task at hand, when you're trying to complete that task, you're being challenged just enough, not too much to where you're overwhelmed, not too little to where you're bored, but just enough, challenged consistently. You can be in this flow state and you can be there for hours, lost. It's a beautiful thing. It really is a beautiful thing when you're in the flow state. All your senses are heightened. Your memory, your cognition is firing on all cylinders. You can achieve physical feats because of that flow state. So let's get into the next highlight. One of the main forces that affects consciousness adversely is psychic disorder. That is, information that conflicts with existing intentions or distracts us from carrying them out. We give this condition many names depending on how we experience it: pain, fear, rage, anxiety, or jealousy. All these varieties of disorder force attention to be diverted to undesirable objects, leaving us no longer free to use it according to our preferences. Psychic energy becomes unwieldy and ineffective. Now, I consider this the interruption of flow. It's something that breaks that rhythm that you are in, and it could be, all those negative emotions are primarily what really stunt or interrupt that flow session, and it becomes a struggle to get back into it. So by minimizing those negative emotions, we're able to maintain more of a state of flow consecutively. Now, even with those everyday struggles, negative emotions can automatically enter into us, but with discipline, we can mitigate a lot of it. I want to get into the next highlight here. It says, it's exhilarating to come closer and closer to self-discipline. You make your body go and everything hurts, then you look back in awe at the self, at what you've done. It just blows your mind. It leads to ecstasy, to self-fulfillment. If you win these battles enough, that battle against yourself, at least for a moment, it becomes easier to win the battles in the world. It's a beautiful thing because when you accomplish something and you look back at it, that feeling is one of the best feelings. You're proud of yourself. Your self-esteem improves. You feel like you have a purpose. You're on a mission. You're getting these things done. That's the battle that you're winning. The battle against yourself. When you completed something hard and difficult, it's like I could imagine somebody who builds houses, right? After the house is built and they stand there on the sidewalk and marvel at their creation. From the architect to the mason to the carpenter, everybody pitched in for this beautiful home and it's completed. It must be a gratifying experience to be a part of that and to look at it. And that goes for anything. If you're a music composer or if you do any kind of art, you look back on what you've created, and that's a great feeling. The next highlight, when we choose a goal and invest ourselves in it to the limits of our concentration, whatever we do will be enjoyable. Now, you choose a goal and you're dedicated to that goal 100%. You give it all your energy. It's going to be enjoyable. Even if you switch the goal and say, okay, I'm going to pivot, I'm going to do something else. But you create another goal that's just as exciting, just as desirable as the first one. You're living to the fullest and you're going to enjoy that process because of it. Pleasure is an important component of the quality of life, but by itself, it does not bring happiness. Sleep, rest, food, and sex provide restorative, homeostatic experiences that return consciousness to order after the needs of the body intrude and cause psychic entropy to occur. But they do not produce psychological growth. They do not add complexity to the self. So it's about disciplined actions versus desirable actions. So it's more rewarding and there's more enjoyment in going beyond the desires of the human body and pushing yourself to other limits to achieve something that was unexpected or unimagined, something with a sense of novelty. Stretch yourself. So basically, Pleasure is evanescent. It's very complex. It's not as rewarding unless you're fully focused. Enjoyment appears at the boundary between boredom and anxiety, when the challenges are just balanced with the person's capacity to act. So if it's too easy, it's not challenging enough and you're going to get bored. If it's too difficult, you're going to feel discouraged and stressed because you can't get anywhere. So you need to be challenged just enough, at the same time, not picking something too easy. And the next highlight, although the flow experience appears to be effortless, it is far from being so. It often requires strenuous physical exertion or highly disciplined mental activity. It does not happen without the application of skilled performance. Any lapse in concentration will erase it, and yet, while it lasts, consciousness works smoothly. Action follows action seamlessly. In normal life, we keep interrupting what we do with doubts and questions. Why am I doing this? Should I perhaps be doing something else? Repeatedly, we question the necessity of our actions and evaluate critically the reasons for carrying them out. But in flow, there is no need to reflect because the action carries us forward as if by magic. The closest example I can put to this is in regards to writing rhymes. It could be pretty difficult to say something meaningful, have it make sense, and have it rhyme the whole way through. And I can remember the first time I ever tried to write a rhyme, I felt like I was taking the SATs. It was like I was arm wrestling my pen to write it. It took all day for me to write one verse, and it was subpar. It wasn't even really that good. But I, being obsessed with hip hop and lyricism, kept trying and kept trying to rhyme and write lyrics. Got to a point where I could write it fairly quickly. And it's not always easy to write a verse, but I can remember on multiple different occasions where the whole verse basically wrote itself. It felt like the verse automatically came right out of me. Like I didn't even do it. And it was written within, 30, maybe 40 minutes, the whole thing. A lot of times, those are the best verses I've ever written. I look back on some of the things that I said, I'm like, damn, I came up with that. Surprising myself as if I wasn't even the one to come up with it. So I know I was definitely in a flow state when creating those lyrics. Or you may have times where maybe you're building a fort. I remember being a young kid building a fort outside, right? And we were gathering up the pieces of wood. We got the hammer, the nails, and all this stuff. And we're doing it all day long. And we look back and we say, wow, it's dark already. What's going on? I can remember another occasion where my friend, this is in the early 90s. We didn't have cameras on our phones and stuff. Most of the phones back then actually had cords and they were in the kitchen. But my friend came over with a video camera, big, bulky video camera, VHS, and came over in the afternoon sometime. But we were recording a movie. We were creating a movie. And we must have been doing this for about 6 hours. It was summertime. And by the time we were filming the last scene, it was dark outside. And it was funny because it went from, we could see the sun out and it cut to the next scene and all of a sudden it was dark out. So another time, that's another example where we didn't even notice time going by. It just flowed. It just trickled by because we were so immersed and engaged in what we were doing. It was super fun. And all of us that were making that movie to this day still remember it. So those are some of the most memorable times is when you're in flow and you're doing what you love doing. You're passionate about what you're doing. And that's when you're doing your best work. Let's get into the next quote. Despite ambiguous findings, all large-scale surveys agree that citizens of nations that are more affluent, better educated, and ruled by more stable governments report higher levels of happiness and satisfaction with life. And then it goes on to say how Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands appear to be the happiest countries, and the United States is following behind. Despite their high divorce rates, alcoholism, crime, and addictions, it's behind, but not far behind. It's not surprising given the amount of time and resources we spend on activities whose main purpose is to provide enjoyment. It goes on to say the average American adult works about 30 hours a week and spends an additional 10 hours doing things that are irrelevant to the job, such as daydreaming or chatting with fellow workers. They spend a slightly smaller amount of time on the order of 20 hours per week involved in leisure activities, 7 hours actively watching television, 3 hours reading, 2 hours in active pursuits like jogging, making music, or bowling, and 7 hours in social activities like going to parties and seeing movies or entertaining family and friends. Let's get to the next quote. One of the most ironic paradoxes of our time is this great availability of leisure that somehow fails to be translated into enjoyment. Compared to people living only a few generations ago, we have enormously greater opportunities to have a good time. Yet there is no indication that we actually enjoy life more than our ancestors did. Opportunities alone, however, are not enough. We also need the skills to make use of them. Now, who's to say that our ancestors, a couple hundred years ago, were not living more fulfilled, enjoyable lives than we are today? In fact, they were actually more engaged in the moment. Back then, they didn't have washing machines. They didn't have a lot of the luxuries that we have today. So, in order to get things done or contribute to their survival, they had to do more activities. And think back thousands of years ago. Let's go back 2,000 years ago. There were no grocery stores to go shopping in. Chances are we were hunting for our food. So our survival depended on how good we can climb that tree, sit up there, and snipe out that animal and carry it home. Human beings were more engaged. There was more inventions 100 or 200 years ago because out of necessity, people were thinking of these inventions. I think it was the late 1800s where we had an astronomical jump in innovation. And then over the next 150 years, there was some innovation, but it wasn't as explosive as it was back then. Anyway, they say we're going through another technological innovation right now with automation and AI and the internet and things like that. But how are you going to produce flow nowadays? We're not forced to produce it like our ancestors were. And if you look around today, you see people glued to their devices or glued to their video games or their TVs. And then you look at the data and you see that a lot of people are stressed out. A lot of people are having a lot of anxiety and depression. And we do know that social media, yada, yada, television contribute to that. And I think it's deeper than that. I think it's because we're not doing enough activities in life. The reason why those problems exist is because we don't have to go outside and do anything. We can just sit in the house for 24 hours a day and stay there. You have DoorDash and Uber Eats deliver your food. You can work from your computer. So this is the reason why it's even more important to force yourself outside, force yourself to do physical exercise, which increases brain activity, especially cardiovascular exercise. Challenge your brain, keep learning, keep producing flow. All right, let's get into the next highlight. Some people enjoy themselves wherever they are, while others stay bored even when confronted with the most dazzling prospects. So in addition to considering the external conditions or the structure of flow activities, we need also to take into account internal conditions that make flow possible. See, a lot of people are focused on external conditions. What outside of me is going to cause me fulfillment when actually it's inside of you. And we went over this on manifesting and law of attraction and things like that. But the true motivation comes from within. And this is in regards to people looking for entertainments and enjoyments outside of themselves when they can find it within themselves. And all they need to do is tap into it. Okay, let's get into this next highlight. A less drastic obstacle to experiencing flow is excessive self consciousness. A person who is constantly worried about how others will perceive her, who is afraid of creating the wrong impression or of doing something inappropriate, is also condemned to permanent exclusion from enjoyment. So are people who are excessively self centered. A self centered individual is usually not self conscious, but instead evaluates every bit of information only in terms of how it relates to her desires. For such a person, everything is valueless in itself. A flower's not worth a second look unless it can be used. A man or a woman who can not advance one's interest does not deserve further attention. Consciousness is structured entirely in terms of its own ends, and nothing is allowed to exist in it that does not conform to those ends. Although a self conscious person is in many respects different from a self centered one, neither is in enough control of psychic energy to enter easily into a flow state. Now, you can't even begin to get into a flow state if you're self conscious because you're constantly worried about what other people are going to think. You can't even get loose. You can't even let your personality shine or let your talents thrive because you're too busy thinking about perfectionism or self doubt. You can't be creative like that. Then, on the flip side, a self centered person is in a scarcity mindset because they're only thinking about what they so desperately need to get by any means necessary. They're not living in abundance. So it's a constant rush against the clock to get what they need. So you can't fall too far to one side or the other, self consciousness or self centeredness. You really got to be in between those two. Normally, human beings will oscillate between the two. Some people veer to one side more than the other, but we really must gain control over that. Highlight I thought was noteworthy was about survivors in the concentration camps like Viktor Frankl and Bruno Bettelheim. They reflected on their sources of strength under that extreme condition of adversity. You know, they were in this concentration camp basically starving, being worked all day with not enough nutrition. And he concludes the most important trait of survivors is a non self conscious individualism or a strongly directed purpose that is not self seeking. People who have the quality are bent on doing their best in all circumstances, yet they're not concerned primarily with advancing their own interests because they are intrinsically motivated in their actions. They're not easily disturbed by external threats. With enough psychic energy free to observe and analyze their surroundings objectively, they have a better chance at discovering in them new opportunities for action. If we were to consider one trait a key element of the autotelic personality, this might be it. Narcissistic individuals who are mainly concerned with protecting their self fall apart when the external conditions turn threatening. The ensuing panic prevents them from doing what they must do. Their attention turns inward in an effort to restore order in consciousness, and not enough remains to negotiate outside reality. You see, they're too preoccupied with their worries and their scarcity to even figure out how to cultivate the strength to get through the adversity in front of them. And on the flip side, the ones who have more awareness can effortlessly get through the struggle because they find meaning in something that's greater than themselves. You know, this is why worry is such a negative emotion. It's one of the biggest ones. Worry can really drag you down. One of the best ways that I use to get rid of worry is I psych myself out of it. When I start feeling worried about whatever, paying the bills, all kinds of things cause worry, but I literally physically psych myself up. I'll pump myself up, jumping around. I'll start, I'll drop down, do some push ups. I'll chant the way I talk to myself. I'm using all positive affirmations, telling myself how great I am, telling myself why I'm so great, reminding myself of what I've done before and who I really am. So that's one of the best ways to psych yourself out of any funky emotion. You got to shake it from you. And what is at the root of anger? Really, it's fear. So by shaking off the anger, you shake off the fear. So that's going to conclude part one of my Flow series based on the book written by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And this will be sort of a literary journey where we explore and ingrain the concepts of flow into our practice. I want you to look at each episode as a guide that can be used in all endeavors and all walks of life. So stay tuned for part two of the series. In the meantime, practice flow and create your masterpiece. See you on the next one.